Namaskar. A very, very good morning to everyone. We have with us a very, very special guest today. That's Professor G. Venkatraman from IIM Indore. And he is a specialist sinologist, if I can call him. He specializes on China, geopolitics, global governance, cultural aspects, and trade related issues because that is what he teaches in IIM Indore at the undergraduate and the postgraduate level. Venkaji, very, very happy to have you. In fact, it's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you as part of the IS Literary Society today to talk about something which is very, very intriguing to all of us. So, we are hoping you will demystify China for us today and for our audiences. Some of our audiences have already joined. So, let me also welcome all of you who have joined today. And I know this is a topic of interest from a lot of messages that I got yesterday. So thank you very, very much. I must tell you, Venkat, that we have a very discerning and a very, very dedicated and punctual audience. And it's the audience, the discerning audience, and speakers like you, which have enabled us to sustain this platform and hold very, very meaningful and constructive dialogues, bridging the gap between civil servants and civil society. So thank you with this note, and just for all those people who are joining us for the on this platform for the first time ever, just a small brief introduction of what this platform does. We came into existence in December 2018 when the civil servants of Rajasthan decided to organize themselves to hold some, extracurricular activities because all work and no play makes Jack and Jill dull boys and girls, or men and women, or officers for that matter. So that is how this platform came into being. But more importantly, the idea behind this platform was, to provide an informal setting for the civil servants and civil society to collaborate, to hold conversations, to communicate, to hold dialogues, and connect. So we have been running this, platform for the last 3+ years now, and we have done more than 50 sessions in offline and online mode. And in this series, we are today talking about China, something very, very relevant. And let me also tell everybody that now we will be doing a special series, in fact, two special series, one dedicated to celebrating women of India. There are a lot of books and a lot of people who will hold those dialogues and discussions with us. And also the other series, which we are starting from this year onwards, is with this talk today, where we will talk about geopolitics, international relations, because that is an area of interest to us and for, I'm sure, everybody else, because we are, after all global citizens. So with these words now, I once again very, very warmly welcome Venkatji. And may I request you, Venkatji, to say a little hello to our audiences, and then I will formally introduce you and get started with the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Mughda2 V1. Thanks a lot, IS, Rajasthan IS Literary Association for inviting me. And I do follow, the association's activities regularly in the social media the last 1.5 years, and I have seen that how this association has made tremendous progress, with the active participation one and all. And Mughda2 V1 has been, like a steward, leading the whole series of activities that has been under the banner of IS Literary Association. And I'm looking forward to, interact and share my views with all of you. Thanks a lot. So today's topic, demystifying China. I think more than demystifying China, we need to understand, what is the relevance of China. Before Mughda actually introduces me, I'd like to start on a very lighter note. This is regarding the relevance of China. It seems, I was reading this thing in a book, and the book talks about an imaginary dialogue in 1970s between Richard Nixon, the United States president, and Brezhnev, the Soviet leader. So Brezhnev basically calls up, Nixon and says that, Mr. Nixon, Mr. President, I have come to know that you people have developed a supercomputer which can predict events that will take place in 2000. Then Nixon says, "Yes, Mr. Brezhnev, you heard it right. We have done it." So Brezhnev asks him, "Mr. Nixon, if that is true, can you ask your supercomputer who is going to be the members of Communist Party of Soviet Union's Politburo Standing Committee?" And then Mr. Nixon says, "Yeah, of course, just hold on." And then, he pauses for a moment. And then Brezhnev steps in and says, "Hey, you people, simply engage in propaganda. And, what kind of supercomputer is this?" Then Mr. Nixon says that, "Mr. Brezhnev, no, no, it's not propaganda. Believe you me, I can see the supercomputer answering me. But the problem is, it says something in Mandarin. And so therefore, I'm not able to read it and decipher what it is saying." So that is what 2000. This joke basically tells us perhaps that China is going to be a significant force to reckon with. So with this small anecdote, I would pass on to Mugdha.
So thank you very much, Venkat. That was really interesting. And since you will figure out in the course of the introduction that Venkat is a fluent Mandarin speaker, there are very few people in India who have that kind of command over the language as also of the subject. So here I go with a formal introduction of Dr. G. Venkatraman is currently an associate professor in the area of humanities and social sciences, Indian Institute of Management, Indore. Venkat is a sinologist. He has completed his doctoral studies from the School of Government in China's premier university, Peking University at Beijing. Venkat is a fluent Mandarin speaker. He has also worked in Beijing as a professional for 2 years and 8 months, which is close to 3 years. Venkat offers courses like Understanding China, Political Risk in International Business, and Business Ethics at the postgraduate level. In the undergraduate level, Venkat offers courses like International Relations, Power Rivalries, and Global Governance in the 21st Century. He has been a visiting fellow in the BRICS Center at the Fudan University, Shanghai, and visiting faculty in ICN Nancy, France. His areas of research interest are China's interface with global governance and business ethics pedagogy. So, with these words of introduction, thank you once again, Venkat, for being with us here and starting on a very, very anecdotal note because that has set the ball rolling for us to discuss China today. And this is, I'm hoping, going to be a very, very interesting session for all our audiences. Venkat, tell me something. Where does China get its power from? How has China been able to maintain its relevance and become a power to reckon with? And the fact that we are talking about China today, where does this power come from? What is the DNA of this power? Speak a little about that, and then maybe we'll talk about other aspects of this power.
Yes. I think the power which China derives today, derives from multiple sources. But I think let me begin it by saying that it deals its power and relevance from multiple sources. So if you look at it at a very cultural level, it looks, China is not like a nation state. It doesn't see itself as a nation state. It's better to be understood as a civilizational state, a country which has had 5,000 years of uninterrupted history. And so that is, the cultural aspect. It sees itself as a civilizational state. It is a state which, is extremely, extremely conscious of its very glorious history. It is a state which with people who are always of the conviction that they need to basically reclaim.
Venkat,
Yeah, yeah.
Venkat, we are losing your voice. There is a disturbance in your voice. Can my backup team ekbar just check? Because there is a lot of disturbance in the voice. So, can the audience also just for a minute tell us whether there is clarity in the voice and whether you can hear it? Can somebody just type and let us know, because the voice is breaking on my side. So I just wanted to confirm if it's not happening on the audience side. Surikanji or anybody who's here on the platform, can you just kindly ping and let us know if the voice clarity is there on Venkat's side? Go ahead, Venkat. I think if there's something the audience will.
Yeah, I think Joshi ji has just said that, said that your network is having slight issues, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Venkat. Sorry.
Yeah. So culturally, it's a country which is extremely conscious of its history, and ever since the Opium War, it has looked at its period in history as a century of humiliation, and it wants to basically reclaim its rightful place under the sun. So, that is what is, and even today, many of its strategies, many of its, the leadership's way of looking at things is tremendously influenced by texts which are centuries old. So whether it is the concept of, Tianxia, for example, which looks at the world not in terms of the nation state, but it looks at the world in terms of a universal viewpoint where, China, it looks at the world in terms of a hierarchy of states. It believes in a China which is there in the world dominated by the tributary system. It believes in a world, where it feels that it has got a certain kind of human leadership that it has to offer, and that kind of a human leadership is based on its civilizational identity, which feels that it's very glorious, and it needs to basically embrace the so-called barbaric cultures outside of China. So it believes in a world which is there arranged in concentric circles with China in the middle of it. So that is, the cultural, historical part of it. Now, if you look at it, from a political standpoint, the post 2008, the American subprime, the financial crisis, has led to basically many questions being raised about the Washington Consensus. So, that is the time when actually China started, realizing that it needs to change its, development model. It needs to start focusing on what they call, earlier till 2008, it was an export promotion, growth model, whereby boosting exports was the main thing. But in 2008, after that shock, it realized that, it needs to now change its development strategy. Now it has to start boosting domestic consumption. It has to start focusing its own economy. It cannot rely on the West. So that is where it started. Basically a question of self-reliance comes into picture. And in the second decade of the 21st century, especially ever since Trump came to United States, putting America first, and a certain kind of message that United States has sent, that we are not going to pay for the security umbrella that United States has provided till now. There's nothing called free lunch, etc., etc., and United States deciding that we are going to walk out of the Paris Accord. We are going to perhaps walk out of WTO. That's what Trump threatened at one point of time, walking out of WHO. So all these, and also the kind of intensive economic and trade ties which China and United States have developed over a short period of time after China's access into WTO, that China has realized that they are in a position today where they can actually dictate terms. And third is, politically they have been very suave. They have been very careful in waiting for their time. And so for 1980s, 90s, first decade of the 21st century, then the second decade of 21st century, they have been extremely pragmatic and practical about what is it that they can do and what is it that they cannot do. So for example, when the Cold War got over, for example, a delegation from third world countries went to meet Deng Xiaoping, the former Communist Party leader. They said that, see, look, Soviet Union is gone. Now America will bully us. Now you are the only people who can actually save us. And then Deng Xiaoping said, we are also just like you. we are not ready to become leader. We don't believe in that. Putang tho. So, we are not ready to become the head. And so if you look at that, today Xi Jinping is basically talking of China Dream. He's talking of Belt and Road Initiative. He's talking of a China which is ready to, reassert and, take a certain kind of revenge basically and rediscover its original identity and overcome the century of humiliation. So he has promised this China Dream. This China Dream is that which basically is, giving China a new push. Mugda, you're muted. Mugda, you're muted.
So thank you very much. That was very interesting way of understanding China, of how China views itself in the contemporary times. And China derives a lot from its past, and it's believed that China believes that the future lies in the past, and he who can control the past can actually control the future, and that is why there is a lot of underpinning of reaching out into the past and glorifying the past, edifying the past, which is happening, be it the Confucius institutes which are setting up. But of course, about culture we will talk later. But given the fact that from the early centuries, 221 is when imperial China came into being, the celestial kingdom, the forbidden land. It had a very, very regional approach to how it looked at its neighbors, right? It had this core periphery understanding of how relations have to be maintained. It came from a power of superiority. So tell us, how does this ancient history, and also the fact that China is a land of the analects of Confucian, Taoism. So how does at one side the Chinese ancient history of this relationship of kowtow and the core and the periphery, of superiority and dominance of the periphery, and the fact that it is the land of Confucius, so that ancient wisdom, how the present contemporary China uses its ancient history and ancient wisdom to define the political narrative today?
Yeah. So I think, one of the most important things that, when it comes to China is, so for example, I'm first answering your question tangentially and I'll come back to the core of your question. So one of the things, that COVID has brought about is, or whether it is with India or whether it is with the larger world, to engage or not to engage with China. I think, my first response to that question is, if you engage with China, the world has still, made very little of the black box called China. Now, by completely not, engaging with China, you are making this black box all the more, significant. So there's always this dilemma. That is one. And number two, given the way developments have taken place, I'll talk about it a bit later. The point is the world today in a position actually to say that we are going to decouple with China, or the world is contending that what if China is going to say that we don't need you, it is we who are in a position to choose whether to decouple or not. So that is the dilemma. Now that kind of a dilemma is something which comes about with any kind of an attempt that we make in understanding China. So we need, as you have rightly pointed out, the past is extremely, extremely tied with, the current China. To give you two examples, uh, you know, uh, if you look at, for example, Xi Jinping, it is believed that Xi Jinping has basically got inspired in his way of looking at things from two very important, so in fact, three important sources. One is basically the Tianxia concept, which one of the Chinese scholars has been talking about, and based on the same lines which you have mentioned. The Tianxia concept, believes that the Western international relations theory are ethnocentric. They are culturally biased. So therefore, we need to look at the world beyond the lens of nation state. and they believe that the world is divided in terms of distributed in terms of concentric circles, and they believe that in the core of the concentric circle it is China, and it is this civilized China which will actually reach out to the barbaric people in the peripheral lands, and so therefore implying that that a certain kind of territorial mindset is there. But however, they also believe that for the reasons which are inexplicable, they believe that unlike the West, who they believe that it is a hegemonic kind of a rulership based on coercion, and they call it patao. This is basically the bad way or the hegemonic way. They call that their way of leadership is benevolent leadership. So they call it Wang Tao. So, and that is why if you look at Xi Jinping, he after doing all this, he has calls like BRI and all. He talks about a community of shared future for mankind, quote unquote. This is what he says. Now, this kind of a sloganeering is something which is derived from the Tianxia concept, which was there earlier in the Zhou dynasty. Similarly, if you look at how so the two important works, one is the 100-year marathon, given by one Colonel Liu Mengfu. He's a Chinese colonel. He has been very critical that China for very long has been dominated by a sense of economic empowerment. But this kind of an economic empowerment without militaristic empowerment is something which is no use. It just makes China appear like a lazy sheep actually. So this is one, and second is there is another work which is basically goes by the name of Wolf Totem. So he says that China has been very sheepish for a very long time, so it needs to become a wolf. And what kind of a wolf? In fact, this work has been critical of the Han way of doing things. They say that China should rediscover its history and learn from the northern invaders, the Manchus, the Genghis Khan, how they have been very, very aggressive. And I think if China has to rediscover its place, it needs to learn from history and needs to be more assertive. So it is believed by people who have been following, Xi Jinping's way of looking at things and his strategy. They believe that this whole idea of China dream and China being more assertive can be traced to these ancient texts and other things which are very centuries long. So even when they are spoken about BRI, for example, Belt and Road Initiative, they don't fall shy of invoking Confucian values to basically say that BRI is something which is talks about equality, talks about doing good for others, etc., etc. So they always are in touch with their past, and this is a state, a leadership which is always having the pulse of history very much, and that is how they function.
Yeah. So very interesting also, Venkat, because in 2021, the Communist Party of China completed 100 years. It was a centenary celebrations, and of course it was locked down, so we didn't hear much of what was happening. And China, of course, is pretty much opaque to the world outside, though it draws so much from the international world, but it is opaque to the world. So that is also something I'd like to know from you. How is it able to maneuver and negotiate in this world of what you say, a globalized world, afford to remain isolated in this manner? This is the world of the infocalypse and social media, and yet it is able to manage not to expose itself to the world and still be able to, in many ways, negotiate the contours from a position of superiority. So that is one question you must answer, because this is a myth. Is it a myth or is it a fact? Because you've been an insider, you've lived in China. So tell us, what is the China from inside that you have seen? Because you also speak the language, so I'm sure you know much better than an outsider.
Yeah. So Mukta, I was in China from 2003 to 10, and let me tell you, I mean, it's like BC actually. The friendly pace at which China has developed, 2010 seems to be like definitely BC era now. In the last 10 years itself, it has seen a monumental change. especially in the field of artificial intelligence and robotics, big data. How the bat X they are called. Paitu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. How they have come up with an answer to Google, Amazon, and other big stories, Microsoft and others. So I think again, China derives tremendous amount of mileage from the kind of economic interdependencies it has been able to brought about as far as its interaction with the world is concerned. So, for example, if 15% of mineral resources that are extracted from South Africa, for example, that is exported to China. 48% of iron ore that is mined in Australia is exported to China. In fact, I remember, the volumes are mind-boggling. In 2008 or 9, if I recall, the annual MTPA, that is, million tons per annum of steel production of Pow Steel, the leading state-owned enterprise, was 80,000 MTPA. And that time, only Pow Steel was producing this annually, 2008. And India's total production during that time was 20,000 MTPA. So China, has been able to, if I leave the American story, or rather the West story to a certain extent, not to get it to a certain extent. I mean, largely, if you look at the world, if you look at interactions between China and Africa, for example, if you look at the interactions between China and Latin America, if you look at interactions between China and Southeast Asia, and over a period of time, gradually, China has made major inroads in South Asia. Through its economic clout, it has been able to, bring in a certain kind of interdependency, which, has made many of these countries dependent on China to a significant extent. Second is China's, as I said, according to a study by 2013, simply on the basis of artificial intelligence, the world's economy, will be artificial intelligence will basically contribute to 15.7 trillion US dollars, of that GDP, global GDP, and out of that 15.7 trillion dollars, $7 trillion will be China's share. Similarly, if you look at the engagement between U.S. and China, for example, many scholars believe that it is impossible to decouple for Americans, come what may, whatever their politicians may say. So even at the height of the trade war, the volume of trade between US and China at the end of 2018 was 660 billion US dollars. 660 US billion dollars. 2019 it came down, but it came down to some 580 if I'm not wrong. In fact, very interesting piece of data is just before the Soviet Union collapsed, per annum volume of trade between US and Soviet Union that time per annum, it was 2 billion US dollars per annum. And during the during the trade war between US and China recently, at the height of that, per day, average per day exchange of trade between these two countries was again $2 billion. So per day. So that is the kind of volumes that we are talking of. So this is economic interdependency. Second is China has very successfully been able to challenge the existing international financial institutions or the post-Second World War international financial governance through establishment of the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank or the Silk Road Fund, and through BRICS, basically the New Development Bank, through all these, things. And it has conveyed a message to the West that it is not going to basically sit just passive, and it's going to be allowed to dictate terms. Earlier, maybe not, now for sure. And to United States chagrin, it's the most close allies like United Kingdom also decided to become a part of AIIB. So France, Germany, all these people have become part of AIIB now. It has more than 100 countries membership. If you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, again, I mean, it is impacting more than 130, 140 countries in the world. So if you look at population, it impacts 70% of the population of the world. So we are talking of mind-boggling numbers here, and I think this kind of interdependency that China has brought about. And if many of us, I'm sure this is a very enlightened audience, and I'm sure they look at various developments related to China because it hogs the limelight every now and then. In fact, it has become so powerful that it has been through Confucius Institutes, as you have said, it has been able to boost its soft power. It has also established its presence in Hollywood. It has also been able to influence some of the legislators in Australia and Germany, whereby through lobbying it was able to influence them. And then Australia and Germany, both the countries' legislatures had to come up with laws whereby they had to think of censuring China. And also, they are extremely shrewd in terms of how do they manage. So, for example, if there are intellectuals who are China baiters, and they are influential in various international fora, China ensures that, they are not given enough of talk time to be very critical of China. Similarly, if people are very praiseworthy of China, people find Chinese model very praiseworthy, then in fact they call them, they give them a red carpet welcome, and they show them the Great Wall of China, and give them scholarships or research, etc., etc. So it is a very sophisticated country working at multiple levels to ensure its dominance and how it makes headway.
Yeah, that was absolutely wonderful. Such a vast expanse of covering different gamuts, and you very rightly mentioned about the economic interdependency. And let me just, for the benefit of the audience, talk a little bit about the fact that we all know that China is the most populous country in the world, 1.5 billion people. It is the third largest, global trade partner. It has a 18.46 trillion US dollar economy. It's got a trade surplus, as you mentioned, of 535 billion US dollar billion plus. It has huge investments in assets around the country, and there is a web, and that web, very rightly, is just a contemporary version of its ancient imperial empire kind of a understanding that it has. And that is why China has invested not just in Africa heavily, Latin America, and also in the SAARC region. You have investments in Gwadar port, you have investments in ports in Sri Lanka, so even around the Indian Ocean belt. And also what you mentioned about the various international governance institutions, that probably may have some kind of a traditional rivalry with Japan, because Japan has very, for many years, very successfully ran the Asian Development Bank model. And I remember I was, Venkat, involved in very early stages of negotiations when this bank was coming up, and whether India had to join or not had to join. So I totally understand what you're saying. Also, the fact that somewhere I, it was after Deng Xiaoping, China opened for the first time, understood the importance of, economic interdependence after Mao's Cultural Revolution had failed. And then in 2001, after such a long time, China joined the WTO. In 2017, the first Chinese premier to attend Davos, the World Economic Forum, was Xi Jinping. So, it has even its, economic interdependencies have timelines. And if you look at timelines, they're stretched timelines from 1979 to 2001 to 2017. But my question to you is, given this kind of an expanse, we go back to the Opium Wars, right? And the Qing dynasty. China's experience of interacting with the mercantile powers, the colonial powers, and Great Britain for that matter, later on in the Cold War and the post Cold War era, its experiences with US and Russia and Japan, and the kind of centuries of humiliation post the opium wars, I think has some kind of bearing on how it interacts with these powers. Can you talk specifically about these four countries? Because somewhere I feel that China's rise is also in a way linked to the decline of the American, dominance in the globe. So talk a little about these four big powers: US, Russia, UK, Japan, and then maybe we can come closer home and talk about the Indian Ocean Rim and what China is doing there.
Yeah. So we talk about United States, for example. I mean, okay, let me just start talking about Japan. Japan is something, a country which many of us may be surprised that China is perhaps having less issues with India than it has with Japan. Because Japan, the way Japanese soldiers during the just before the Second World War, the way Japanese soldiers basically humiliated the Chinese is something which the Chinese are never going to forget. It is always fresh in their memory. In fact, this always is a flashpoint, where the whenever the Japanese prime minister goes to the Yasukuni shrine in Japan to pay homage to Second World War soldiers, every time it is a major issue in China. And China has always very carefully, like every other government, has been extremely shrewd in whipping up the Chinese nationalist sentiment whenever it has had issues in the domestic arena, and it has instigated anti-Japan kind of sentiment within the mainland. Uh, so Japan is, but if you look at in the recent past, just before the Tokyo Olympics, for example, China restarted engaging with Japan in a certain way. And Japan also, I think, over a period of time has realized that it can rely on United States only this much. And Trump came and made it very clear. So the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, is something which has been a major game changer as far as China and Japan is concerned. Now, I was reading somewhere that when China was recently has been doing a lot of hanky panky in Hong Kong, one country, two systems. It has not lived up to its earlier promises, and Hong Kong has seen lots of demonstrations. So the Japanese Prime Minister, it was expected by the world that the Japanese Prime Minister is going to take notice of this, and he would come up with a reprimand, or he will at least denounce what China is doing there. But it needed the G7 to push the then Premier Shinzo Abe that, Mr. Abe, what are you doing? Come on, say something. This is what is happening in Hong Kong. So so that is, and why was he quiet? And ultimately he did say something. But you see, Japan is also realizing how, to what extent it can afford to antagonize a growing and powerful China. So that is, the Japanese element. There is a tremendous amount of economic, angle to it. Similarly, if we look at, United States looks at China as something which is very, very different. In fact, the impact of the way China has developed, China has become very assertive. It has forced some of the very senior functionaries, for the first time in history, perhaps, to question their own existing model. So, for example, someone like William Burns, the former Attorney General, he said it's high time that we need to, rethink on which horse we are going to ride. What he meant to say was that, are we going to basically stick to the individualistic system whereby private capitalism will not be regulated by any means by the state? Or if that is the case, then we are in threat, because here it is, we have a model like Chinese model which is thinking of mixing up the private entrepreneurship, the state-owned enterprises, and the academia, everything molded into one, and the way it can mobilize and put everything together, and it has come up with a model which is threatening. And the kind of reaction that has come from United States has made some very senior officials to say that whatever America is doing is nothing. So one of them was quoted saying that the house is on fire and we are just trying to use a hose pipe on the bush, basically. So, so this is the kind of threat, that China has started posing. So whether it is the TikTok ban, or whether it is this kind of a kind of a kind of a complex that China has made major headways in the 5G technology. In fact, if you look at 5G technology, uh, 30% of the world's non-American territories today already adopt Chinese 5G technology. And if you look at, the if you look at China's influence in another way, so 5G technology is still, in its nascent stage. So who is going to, be instrumental in formulating the regime which is going to regulate the 5G technology? So China has a major first movers advantage. And more importantly, it has started basically having a not a top bottom approach that we are the ones who have started 5G. So मैं जो बोलूंगा वही होगा. No, it has not done that. It has very smartly, it has adopted a bottom up approach. And already, you have OTT services, over the top services, which are there in many cities in the world. 16 European cities today are basically having OTT services which derive their functioning from, the 5G technology. In fact, Siemens owner, long back said, one who owns, the standards, owns the market. So therefore, International Telecom Union will be headed by a Chinese in 2023. If you're looking at the international organization, international standardization organization, it has standards organization, the ISO. In 2007, China was just a minnow, but in 2015, very quickly, in a very short period of time, Chinese was heading that. So and for a long period of time, many of us think that China is a copybook. It always mimics, it copies stuff and all that. But if you look at, in the recent past, the kind of patents that many of the Chinese companies like Huawei had, Huawei actually leads the pack in filing the number of patents that have been there with the European Patent Office. So European Union, the European countries have realized that they can no more play ball with the United States when it comes to deal with China. Trump has given them enough reasons, and so therefore you see that despite the tremendous attack that has been made on China due to the COVID, at the end of 2020, you have a European Union China investment treaty that is signed. So therefore, we are looking at, a European Union which is ready to deal with China, bereft of, United States. So except, England, which still basically is, liable to some kind of arm twisting, rest of the Europe is fine with China.
Yeah, no, no, very interesting because China has very nicely used its traditions and technology to transform and develop some kind of a creative partnership and creative diplomacy with the world, and in its inaccessibility to a very large extent. I won't say it's isolation, but in its inaccessibility lies the exotic charm of China. But since you've mentioned technology and you talked about economic interdependency, for a very long time, people who grew up on Adam Smith's classical economics believed that laissez-faire could only exist, free markets could only exist in in democratic settings. But China, who is negotiating with the world, has proved otherwise in many ways. See it enter WTO. It has what you called government backed public sector organizations. which dominate trade and negotiations. Lot of R&D happens in those, and yet from the technical legal point of view, it is never able to be in contravention of the WTO principles. So it is very very creative way of negotiating even global institutions where China dominates, and you've of course mentioned. So tell me this triad, because I had the chance to study abroad, where in my class I had huge number of Chinese students, and in fact I traveled all over America in Chinese buses, with with me being the only non-Chinese, and everybody else, out of 80 or 90 people, I was the only single person who was not a Chinese. And I learned something very nice. They're traveling the world, they're shopping, they're doing everything, they're studying abroad, and then coming back. How are the people negotiating? So my two questions. One is a macro question of how education, global education, how China is using global education, human resources, its own human resources, its technology, right? Its R&D, to transform its country and to build these economic interdependencies. That is at a macro level. How it's doing, what is happening inside. Talk about that. What is its leverage power inside? The underbelly of China in terms of the public sector in China. What is it doing? That. And the second is what is happening at the individual level, because the rise of China to a very large extent dependent on cheap labor. There were sweatshops in China, and that is how they dominated the entire textile trade. Reaching out to the world in many many. It's like almost a conveyor belt kind of a system that runs, and this is paradoxical in many ways. How are the people who go out into the world, which is open, come back into a world which is isolated, where they don't even have Google and Facebook and stuff like that? How do these two people, how these two very diverse kind of strains at the macro level of governance and the micro level of individuals interacting in a daily kind of a setting?
Yeah, very good question. You see, it's a very complex question. I don't know to what extent, within the limited time, I can answer. But let me, go to the second question first. Let us look at the individuals. We forget that, unlike us, in the Chinese society, politics has always never ever been meant for the masses. It has always been meant for the classes. And historically, culturally, it is a part of an average citizen's DNA that all that he needs is basically a good life, a good standard of living at the end of the day. That is, something we need to understand. Now, let me, just confine myself to post 1949 China. So if you look at post 1949 China, you had the Great Leap Forward, you had the, major catastrophic cultural revolution. In the late 1950s, you had the famine. And so that generation, has seen, what it means to be poor. And those, the Long March generation, which were purged, people like Deng Xiaoping and, even Xi Jinping and many others, Hu Jintao, they all basically were purged. And they saw that this is not the China which we actually, dreamt of. And then they come and basically change the narrative, and they bring in the project of economic modernization. And when they bring the project of economic modernization, there is a lot of issues in 1980s. You see that, the benefits of economic modernization are limited to those people who are influential with the party cadres and, who have guanxi, major relation, who are having major influence. And therefore, the Tiananmen, incident in 1989 was a fallout of, those kind of corruption and all that. But 1992, Deng Xiaoping makes his major South China tour, and then he opens up China. And then over a period of time, Hu Jintao comes in, and Hu Jintao comes and suddenly changes the narrative and says that, you see, all these years, we have come up with economic modernization, but there are only two classes which have been left behind, and those are basically the working class and the agricultural peasant class. So therefore, he comes up with the social harmony, call. what is that called, a harmonious society. But and then 2006 there was agriculture tax abolition, etc., etc. And then Xi Jinping comes and he gives this, basically Xi Jinping, what is that called, the Belt and Road Initiative, and he talks of the new normal, and he says how the China dream is very much within us. He launches the anti-corruption. So and the latest is, is basically how the Chinese government has had a major crackdown on the tech domain. In fact, the way Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent have all these companies have developed a very short span of time. Their business models have led to, people working 12 hours a day, without any rest. There is nothing called Saturday or a Sunday. So the youth of the country was completely, lost its enthusiasm. And the government realized. So every time, I think the secret of, the individual Chinese and the Communist Party having a connect is somehow the party has been able to successfully touch the pulse of the, common man there. And it has given a glimmer of hope. Whether, the time has come, whether that glimmer of hope continues to give the party a certain kind of legitimacy that, the party asks for, that is something which is definitely questionable. I feel that it's definitely questionable. In fact, many people say that Xi Jinping is here to, be the king and rule himself for eternity. But I have a slightly different take on it. In fact, I feel that, Xi Jinping has got his rents in the party simply because he's not sure that whether the next generation of leadership, which have been born in 60s and 70s, are they having enough firepower and ammunition to keep the whole society together. And if that happens in a premature way, then it might lead to a certain kind of implosion. Because the kind of social stratification, that China has seen in the last 15 to 20 years is not funny. In fact, anti-corruption drive, or anti-tech, strategy of the party is driven by this kind of an aspiration to regain a certain kind of legitimacy, which the party has definitely suffered of late in the last 15 to 20 years. Now, so this is, in short, your answer to your second question. The first question is, the Chinese have been very, very, innovative. They have been very flexible in the way they have, gone about what we call, in the West, it is called Washington Consensus. Here, it is called Beijing Consensus. The Beijing Consensus, if you look at, the word, on one hand, Xi Jinping says that if the Americans are going to, walk out of, the liberalized economies and all that, don't worry. He said in the Davos summit, one of the Davos summits, that I am going to take care of globalization. China will take care of globalization because China has been catapulted to this position where it has today because of the benefits it has got from the accession to WTO. So it is not going to, tinker with that particular aspect of its external economic dealings, number one. Number two, 2003 or 2004, if I'm right, in the Fortune 500, there were only 6 state-owned enterprises that, China had figured. In 2021, Fortune 500, there are 83 state-owned enterprises that figure in the Fortune 500 list. So China has time to time, has changed the way it looks at. So if I give you the example of how it has gone about, the state-owned enterprise reforms, for example. So in 1996, it decided, under a scheme called Chuata Fangxiao, it means that hold on to the big and release the small. So जितना भी strategic sectors नहीं थे वहां पे, वो सारे को प्राइवेटाइज करने दे दिया गया और जितने भी important sectors थे सब अपने पास रखा और उसको डेवलप किया. तो वो वाला that strategy 1996 में आया. अब 1996 के बाद they brought a certain kind of change in the way they look at property rights. For example, they brought in certain kind of legislation which will make people go for privatization. They came up with a certain kind of mixed enterprise reforms whereby they wanted to bring in certain private individuals expertise into the state-owned enterprises so that state-owned enterprises can be reinvigorated and can be put pressure on. Similarly, when Alibaba and Tencent started, playing their role in the tech domain. In the initial years, Alibaba, Jack Ma's policies, he started even dealing with wealth management, products. And some of these wealth management products were paying people who are going to invest in them more than the banking sector, the state banks. Now the government has been fed up of telling many of these state banks that you have to manage better, you have to retain your customer, you have to hike the interest rate, X, Y, Z. But they never paid it. Now the Chinese government has been playing Jack Ma against its own child, the state-owned enterprises in the banking sector to up their act. Similarly, when WeChat came, people had free voice to voice chat. It was a super app, so people were able to talk to each other. So and then the major state owned enterprise like China Telecom, China Mobile, all these companies were having major tariffs. They were not cutting down on price. And so therefore the government, basically the Chinese state leadership, sent a message that again, you people pull up your socks, otherwise these private players are going to eat into your business. So they have a very, very tremendous knack, ingenuity in going. Their regulation is also something which is very flexible. There are important bodies, whereby the government says that during these 4 or 5 years you need to be the rear sit in the rear part of the car. After 5 6 years, you are supposed to take the steering wheel. So if you look at the private sector's emergence in the tech domain in China, the government or the state always knew that manufacturing is their forte and technology is something which can never be a part of their deal. So therefore, the state happily gave this long rope, and at an opportune time, when Jack Ma was about to, become a parallel figure, or he tried to show himself as a force larger than life figure compared to Xi Jinping or the Communist Party, or Ant Financial is bigger than any of the state-owned enterprises. They said, "Hello, historically, your IPO is going to be the biggest one. Just cool down. There's no IPO." So he just was made to keep quiet. So this we say this happens only in India. So China, this happens only in China. It's not very possible to transfer those kind of lessons. But having said that, a short answer to this question, many of our in our country actually have this kind of a thing that, अरे वो तो कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी है, वो कुछ भी कर सकता है, and हम तो democracy हैं. Many times we have this habit of sympathizing ourselves by looking at this binary. Not everything that India has failed in is because of democracy. Similarly, not everything that China has achieved is also because of its autocratic way. In fact, there is an edited book. I will pass on the information to you. It came in somewhere around 2007 or 8. The book deals with India-China comparison, and the book's major submission is that it is very, very wrong to look at India-China comparison through this binary of democracy and autocracy. And if autocracy would have given China the edge, then India should not have done well the way it could do in a certain time when the annual GDP growth of China and India more or less matched with each other during a certain phase in the first decade of 21st century. Now, if democracy is to be blamed for that, how did India achieve that? So therefore, we need to basically understand what is it that they are doing. What is it that, what is the kind of policy making they are engaging? What is the new kind of public-private partnerships they are engaging in? Whether it is healthcare, or whether it is, transportation, we need to understand many of these things and find out, more about it. I don't know whether I have answered your question or not, but I think this is what came to my mind straight away.
You have actually, you have answered the question in many ways. And if I just summarize in a word, keeping the two binaries aside, it basically is a very, very long envisioned statecraft where the outcomes are known. When you have clarity on the outcomes, your technological development, how you use your public private partnerships, how you use your human resource development, how you use your soft power, then actually all aligns in sync with with your statecraft goals basically. And I think that China understands very very well. Moving back to something that you spoke about earlier, but I'd like you to explain a little more the way you have this particular part is there are various kind of there is a cultural capital that China has, and it is building on that cultural capital, which was not so it's moving in phases. After 1971, when the country opened, its opacity, openness to trade scale was 4.9. In 2006 it reached a maximum of 64 points or percentage or whatever. And again in 2020, it came down to say about 35%, where the global standard is right now, out of 186 country, about 82%. So, China opens, comes back. It is like interacts with the world, comes back and introspects. That is the model that it has been adopting, which is basically coming again, if I refer back, the core and the periphery relationship that it has had. Speaking of the cultural the cultural capital, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the subaltern developments which are happening in, say, the field of art, film, music, and how China is leveraging to improve its image in the intellectual world outside. Because I think a lot of effort is being invested, time, money, and very concerted effort through the Confucius institutes which have been built up to reach out to the world using soft power. A little bit on that, because my first impressions of China came from a book which my mother had referred to me about, Perlis Buck, The Good Earth, and spoke about how things happen in China. Also speak about the literature that is coming out from China during this time to influence its image in the world outside.
Bugda, I'll be very honest with you. Frankly speaking, I don't follow very closely art, literature, and all. But what I can tell you is, something which I'm very passionate about, and sports basically. How China has been
Hmm.
able to use sports to assert itself as a major power. So, if you look at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, for example, China did,
Hmm.
very in a very determined way tell the whole world. It was a major, point in their post 1949 history, and they're extremely proud of it. And the way they basically went on projecting China as a sport power, and for the first time, they overtook, United States and became the number one, in the medal tally. So China takes its sports very, very seriously, and in fact, in the recent past, I have seen that various stories relating to that aspect, which aspect I'm just coming to, has died down. But in fact, 2 3 years back, I was coming across certain stories which were talking of how Chinese football league is going to be a major threat to some of the major football leagues in the world. And
Oh.
what is the reason? The reason being that the kind of money that they are able to splash is not funny. So people were afraid that the new Super League that is going to be the biggest Super League likely to take place. It has not happened. What happened to that story? I don't know. I'm not seeing much of it, but people were afraid that some of the biggest stars in football are going to be attracted to the Chinese football league rather than the Italian or Bundesliga or the Premier League or the Spanish league, La Liga. Um, so coming to cultural capital, this is something which I stayed there for 7 years, as you mentioned, more than 7 years. I think this is something which there's a certain way of looking at things which is so uniquely Chinese that has made them very successful. I'll just give three examples. Maybe then you can take over again. One is, Chinese, for example, they believe, normally we have read and we have heard from our early childhood that an early bird catches the prey, right? But the Chinese are extremely patient. What they say is they go one step further. They say that an early bird catches the prey fine, but it is also the first one to get shot. So therefore, I be patient. Number one. Number two, there is nothing which is substitute to hard work according to Chinese. So they say chilku nai lao. So therefore they say that eating bitterness, is something which you always need to succeed. In fact, one of the most appealing things which I learned from that society, and it is worth emulating, and I tell to my students here also, that Chinese believe that if you succeed, or rather if you fail, it is your failure. Okay, it is you individual who has failed. But if you have succeeded, then they say that you are lucky. They never say that you have succeeded. They say neither unchi hao, you're very lucky. So success is attributed to luck, failure is attributed to lack of individual effort. Amazing, way of looking at things. And I think a hard-working culture that they are, I think this is one of the secrets of that society, doing so well. And people, those who have seen Chinese working in American universities or in foreign universities, you can vouch. You have also gone there. How extremely, hardworking they are. So that is, and third is, they have a very different way of looking at things. So the typical way of looking at things is, so you have a system, you have a problem, so you go from macro to micro, you identify the problem, pick it, fix it, and band-aid it, and then the problem is solved. But the Chinese, have a different way of looking at things. And that is basically what they call Chengti Quan Nian, which means that for them, everything is a structural thing. So if there is a problem in a certain thing, then that problem, if you solve it, that is not enough, because in a system there are interdependencies. If one thing is at fault, everything else also would have become faulty in the process. So therefore, it's always, approaching things in a holistic perspective, a gestalt perspective. So band aiding does not work, if I can use the word. So I think these are some of the cultural attributes, which the Chinese have, which help them or which guide them. This is how they are inspired by their whatever civilizational values they have, and they continue to strive by such values, and are making progress.
No, you're absolutely right, because I've had the experience of negotiating with them, meeting my counterparts during the big negotiation in South Africa in 2013. Also in 2016, I traveled extensively with a whole bus of Chinese tourists, and I was at the receiving end of a lot of affection in many ways, and it kind of, at the track two level, I would say it changed my impression about people, because the bus would only go to Chinese restaurants to eat food, and people were so magnanimous. They ensured that I was well fed. They looked out for me, that I had reached the bus on time, because I was the only non-Chinese in that entire bus, and we traveled over about eight states, 8 or 10 states in the US. So my impressions are very different. Culturally, I believe that the cultural revolution had a huge impact and bearing on where the Chinese people come from, and of course, Taoism, as you rightly mentioned. So I read somewhere that the Chinese believe that the winner takes it all. You beat someone and you are a hero, and if you are rich, you are always right. So I think these kind of what you say, these axioms kind of, you know what you say, mentor their kind of understanding of how to negotiate inside the country and outside the country. So that was very, very interesting. And one very interesting thing, that hubris, which comes from being superior, though, that one thing that you mentioned, the tyranny of merit, I think that is also something which keeps them humble, maybe. One last question, and then I'll throw the question open to the audience. As a woman, and having met some women during the course of my travels, and also having read some places that there is a lot of independence, which the women are aspiring to. So there is a lot of what you say, with education, with aspirations, with consumerism, with capitalism happening, how do you see the society changing? And do you think that there will be an implosion in society, because we've seen these kind of implosions in the Mediterranean region, in the the Middle East? Do you also think that the way society is very small measures, incrementally changing every day, uh, do you think there will be a repeat of 1989 in terms to come? And how do you see the role of women at the societal level in China, and what it portends for the future of the Chinese society and the engineering, social engineering that might be happen in the country?
Yeah. So, Chinese society is also very much feudal society like us for a long period of time. And then, Mao comes and, he says that women hold half the sky, he said. And, the way women have been encouraged to come out in the public sphere is something which is remarkable in China. And unlike our society, to a very significant extent, women are extremely safe in the public sphere. I mean, you can walk at 10:30, 1:30 in the night in Beijing and Shanghai without feeling threatened or with absolute, sense of security. In fact, I have met many families, and I hate to say this, but I mean it's a fact that many Indian women who have gone to China love China simply because of the kind of security they feel like when they roam around in the public sphere. And they don't have, and they feel sad that they don't have the same kind of freedom in their own country. So this is one. Yes. But if you look at, the one child policy, that is something which has been a major game changer. And so, despite being a feudal society, despite, Mao's woman hold half the sky, the craving for the sun is still very strong in China, even today. Even today. In fact, for the one-child policy in the rural areas, the government made an exception that in the rural areas where people depend on agriculture, if your first child is a daughter, you can go for the second one. But in the second time also, if you get a daughter, then forget about it. So that's the kind of culture we're talking of. But having said that, the way the little emperors or the little empresses, who have been brought up in the one child system, they are amazingly pampered. There is no discrimination whatsoever, and and I think it has given rise to a very significant problem about which actually the government has also of late expressed a certain kind of anguish and disappointment, saying that how urban divorces have increased in China big time. Divorce rates have increased big time with the one child policy generation getting married and finding it extremely difficult to get adjusted to the way the institution of marriage works. It has also led to a lot of pressures on the boys, and with modernization, the way economic modernization has worked after the failures of cultural revolution, that generation has promoted a certain kind of consumerism in the subsequent generations as if there is no tomorrow. And so that kind of a lifestyle, expectation of life, standard of living, a certain luxurious lifestyle, that kind of an aspirational lifestyle, which women have had, it is becoming extremely difficult for them to, get adjusted. And in a larger society, both men and women actually both have, going through this kind of a mass, consumerism kind of a, phase. As far as the whole society is concerned, I think the way China is having an extremely high Gini coefficient, the environment issue, the rich-poor divide, the social stratification that has happened. So all these things are also somewhere, the Chinese youth are, realizing the futility of participating in what they call this, rat race. In fact, the way many of these tech companies exploit the youth, the youth basically said that enough is enough. Now, let me go to some rural land and just relax. Let me focus on what they call, in my inner consciousness. The government suddenly became the youth of my country is going to, focus on inner consciousness, who is going to drive the economy. So these are some of the things that clamor to get your own house, or the way the hukou system works in China. The household registration system, which was started in the late 1950s. It has become quite flexible now. But even so when a student comes from a remote village, to Beijing or a Shanghai, and one of the things which actually determines the choices of marriage partners, whether it is for a boy or for a girl, someone who comes from a tier 2 or tier 3 city, if one of the couple actually have a Beijing or a Shanghai household registration, that becomes an important CV point actually to get married to the other person. So the aspirations are also like, what does the boy have? And before, getting married or before having an affair, do you have a flat? Do you have a Beijing hukou, for example? Do you have a Shanghai hukou? Do you have your own apartment here? What does your father do? Do you have a car? So those, where do you work? So these kind of, things are happening, which the country is actually, especially under Xi Jinping, is extremely worried about. And no matter what it's said, I was listening to a Chinese lady who came to IIM Bangalore in a conference, and she was saying that how gender biases are very subtle. So, for example, companies are not very enthusiastic to hire a married woman, for example. So they say that if she starts if she gets pregnant, then making her travel is going to be difficult, etc., etc. You have to pay maternity leave for maternity, etc., etc. So therefore the preference is for boys. And so these are some of the questions which even the Chinese society faces.
No, that was very enlightening, actually. But I somehow, have an observation on this, Venkat, which is that, what you mentioned about how women are evolving. I also read that someplace when I was doing some research on the textile industry and how it supplies the US markets, basically. And I realized that women from rural areas were happy to work in those very, very stifling conditions, exploitative conditions in the sweatshops in China, in the textile and various other manufacturing industries, only because it gave them a lot of sense of freedom, because the money that they were earning actually allowed them to make decisions about their life. And this, what you've spoken about, the evolution happening in the way the women are thinking in China, is probably a global phenomena now, with plus and minuses here there, because with empowerment comes the right to be able to make a choice, and often this choice can come only with you when you have the yuan or the rupee or the dollar in your pocket. That is when you can actually take decisions about your life. So I think, and also the fact that you mentioned about the youth, uh, that is also dividing the country. So if there is overvaulting ambition of the Lady Macbeth kind in one place, then there is also the Tao Te Ching kind of a Zen attitude, and being minimalistic or being non-essential or being essentialist. No, so that is also happening, and that is also a global template, I think. So maybe China is also experiencing that kind of a thing. So having said that, and I also believe that the Chinese people think, no, that, and I think that also another on poverty and unemployment is a global template, where if you have a bowl of rice and a soup of pork, then I think everything else is acceptable in terms of ideology, culture, governance, and I think that is also a global template. So papi pet ka sawal hai, and that is how we do these little conversations that we do. So thank you very much, Venkat, for touching very deeply on the ancient historical perspective, the cultural, ancient cultural wisdom, the cultural capital, how economic interdependencies have been built, what is happening in the public private partnership, how China is negotiating with the major powers, what it is doing in the Indian Ocean rim, what it is doing in other countries from where the major powers don't have time to indulge, because the major powers are also experiencing some kind of a cathartic kind of a evolution which is happening. RCEP suddenly was important. Of course, India did not sign after prolonged negotiations. The TTP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a kind of a counterpoint to the RCEP, has not taken place. NAFTA is also in a kind of a it couldn't be renegotiated in the way that it was. So I think the global dimensions are changing very, very fast, and I'm extremely thankful to you for giving us such a wonderful perspective, coming from an insider, also somebody who knows, who can read the original sources of research and who teaches. So we are extremely grateful to you, but we are not letting you go, because there are a lot of our audiences who have asked questions, and I'm going to take up their questions now. So Vidya Sarvesan is a professor in IIT Jodhpur, and she wants to know, what is your take on China's abstention from voting in the Ukraine conflict in the United Nations Security Council?
Yeah. So shall I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Vidyaji. So I think China has abstained from a major, Security Council resolution, not for the first time. You see, earlier also, when the first time George Bush Senior was about to, get the mandate from UN Security Council, that was also when China actually abstained. And in fact, China had, interestingly, the Americans had to entice the Chinese by extending them a World Bank loan and giving them a private audience in White House, and to say that if not, you are going for us, at least abstain. That is one. Now, second is, I think for me personally, it's a kind of a no-brainer in the current context. Why China is abstaining? Because if a country like India, which has been quite close to US, can abstain, or perceived to be close to US, can abstain. I mean, China, it is, absolutely crystal clear. Now, China has abstained from, this whole story because, you see, one of the things which I am very afraid of is in the current context, uh, who is the beneficiary? One of the major beneficiaries is China itself, because Russia-Ukraine problem has provided China a test case whereby how will the world react tomorrow if I attack Taiwan? Will the world be, like this only? I don't even need to have a litmus test now. The litmus test free में मुफ्त में रशिया ने पुतिन ने किया. Number one. Number two, we need to understand that China is someone who has tremendous amount of appetite for energy consumption. And Russia is a major supplier of energy for China. So therefore, it's a quid pro quo. So today, if China abstains, then perhaps tomorrow, not only from the energy aspect, but even, from the other aspect, if Putin, who is a major anti-Western voice, if he is on the China side, then China is already, pretty powerful. Uh, what else? I mean, and so therefore, China is happily watching the show. However, China also, I think, if I can add to this whole question, sooner or later, China will find itself in a certain kind of dilemma also. Because one of the major, aspects of Chinese foreign policy has been how it has always been very possessive, or very, pronounced in the way it looks at the question of sovereignty. So therefore, somewhere down the line, it has to contend with the fact that how did it condone this whole intrusion of Russia, and how, Ukraine's sovereignty was compromised with. And tomorrow, if something on similar lines happens with China, what will be China's answer? So I think it's not. It's so therefore, China has abstained, but it is, whether it is for India or whether it is for China, whatever choices they have made, unfortunately, we are in a very, very difficult world, and we have to contend with the pros and cons. But as far as China's abstention is concerned, I think pros definitely weigh heavily when it comes to staying away from that particular resolution. Yes.
Yeah. So, for all the viewers who are watching us, I just want to tell you, please block 13th of March, 11 a.m., because we are going to bring another expert who's going to talk of the Russia-Ukraine relations, right from the historical perspective, the stories, and talk also about the current crisis that is happening right now. So you can hold your questions till then, and you will hear from the experts about it. We will let you know, we will circulate, and you can watch out the space for more. But coming back to questions, Suryakant Jodha is also a very, very discerning audience. He's an organic farmer and he delves into a lot of art and history. And he has a question. He says, China was like any other poor colonized country. What made the Western powers give it the permanent seat in the UNSC in 1946? That, I think, is a very interesting question. You must tell us.
You see, in 1945, when the United Nations was formed, Taiwan was, that time the Kuomintang ruled, China, Chiang Kai-shek, and you had one China. And after 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek fled away to Taiwan, uh, and this was a communist country, and so therefore with a bent towards Soviet Union. So the Americans, for a decided not to disturb the status quo and continue to recognize Taiwan itself as the representative of the Chinese. But in 1971, in the famous Nixon visit, when he went to China, it was then, decided by both the sides, because the Americans wanted to, corner the Soviets during the Cold War, and so therefore they wanted to befriend the Chinese. And so Chinese very smartly said that, fine, we are ready to be friends with you. And they laid down certain, terms and conditions. And one of them was, replacing Taiwan, Republic of China with People's Republic of China. And that is how Taiwan actually was exited from the P5, and it is People's Republic of China, which became one of the P5 members in the UN Security Council.
Okay. Avinash Tripathi is a filmmaker and teaches filmmaking, is a poet, a writer. He wants to know, what is the reason of upsurge of China in economy, sports, and industrial growth in the last 15 years? Earlier, US was leading on these areas, but now it is China. I think you answered it as part of your discussion, but if you'd still like to take it and answer this question.
Yeah, I think the way the government has been very flexible. The government, has come up with policies. I think the government has invested. Maybe I didn't, respond to this aspect of China. I think the government has invested a lot on, skilled education, and has invested a lot on R&D, and the so for example, if I look at even China determined was very determined to have its universities as to be considered some of the best in the world. And unlike India, after the school education, it started coming up with various vocational training, ITI kind of vocational training programs, which will those kind of educational and skill oriented educational programs which are more in alignment with industrial requirements. That is one. And second is China is also a society like ours in many ways. And because the one child policy dominated the Chinese society for a very long period of time, they are also, children were told that they should study hard, they should work hard, and they should clear. There is an exam, just like in India we have the joint entrance exam. There is an exam which the whole nation fears there after their 12th class. It is called Cow. So therefore, that is a very, very rigorous kind of examination that happens, and you are supposed to clear that exam. The traditional expectations, you are clearing that exam and doing it an undergrad program or a postgrad program in Peking University or Fudan University, some major university, and then you work for some major Western company, or go to America for higher studies, or join the government, etc., etc. Now, when this whole technology thing came about, the government, was very, very keen to, change this kind of a narrative. And so, therefore, in 2013, the Chinese premier, came up with this slogan of mass innovation and mass entrepreneurship. Now, in the Chinese society, whatever the government, it's a Confucian society. So the government that way is basically is always high in the hierarchy, and the society, picks up cues from the government time to time very nicely. I mean, the signaling works fantastic there. So when this mass entrepreneurship, mass innovation thing came, suddenly, uh, kids basically telling their parents that, you see, Li Keqiang, our premier, is saying, that party is saying that, there's no problem in going for entrepreneurship. There was a craze for entrepreneurship. And through this, the provincial governments, sub-provincial governments, they all got a cue whereby, incubation centers came about, various skill development courses came about, soft tech, the parks came about, and it started encouraging a certain kind of, ecosystem which will kindle the entrepreneurship. And there was absolute cutthroat competition there. And so that is how, China basically in a very short period of time has been able to stoke the, ingenuity, the initiative of people. And that's, because they are very hardworking and they got a very conducive ecosystem. The government has provided them the right kind of, uh, environment, if one can say so, to pick up their whatever they want to do. So timely interventions has been a very important aspect of this whole story.
Yeah, so there's another viewer. He's a civil servant and he wants to know, during my visit to China in 2019, this is Ajay Aswal asking, religion in public space was conspicuous by its absence. Also, people were tight lipped about the religious choices. Still, a lot of ethics and discipline is evident in the economic activities and manufacturing. Is it ingrained or due to fear of the government? Oh, that's a very nice question, actually.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think, as I said, the Chinese societal values. They are all believed to be China has 56 ethnic nationalities, and the Han nationality dominates with 92% of the population being Hans. I think, just like the examples I gave, modesty, or underrating your own success, attributing it to luck. So all these kind of are very much integral to the cultural values of China. And unlike Indians, I think somewhere religion not being there and this whole karma theory and all that, has actually made them very much this worldly in a way. And so therefore the idea has been that if you work hard, you get it, kind of a thing. So I think their social values are such that they are able to inculcate, such kind of values like discipline and all that. And where in India we tend to get some of these values from, or majorly from, our religious choices. In China, because of the communist system for a long period of time, religion has been kind of an outcast. Although, when I was in China, I could see significant number of people going to Buddhist temples and all, and having incense sticks and all that. But largely, they don't. There is a certain kind of delinking of values like hard work, honesty, and all those things with religion. And in India, to my understanding, this linkage is pretty clear. And because religion was absent because of the Communist Party being in power for a very long period of time, it came to and lack of religion was substituted by their cultural past, which does. So, in other words, they don't necessarily need to get certain kind of a religious, inspiration, religion-related inspiration to be the way they are.
Yeah, if I might just add, Venkat, to that, I think because communism came only in the mid 20th century, as an organized, structured, temporal government. And to 1907, I think, when the revolution happened in Russia, is that's how things began to spread. But I feel that you need religion only because you have a vacuum in the ethics space. You have a vacuum, so you need kind of a validation in terms of governance, at least in individual this thing. So I think China draws largely from its very, very I don't know how to put it. Maybe the kind of philosophers that it has had throughout its civilizational growing up, and I think so that is why maybe that pillar of ethics was very, very strong, and that is why maybe communism found root, maybe because of that, and that is why it didn't have religion. So it could also work the other way around, is what I'm trying to say, that there was
Yeah,
no space for religion, because religion comes only when there is a space in the moral, ethical kind of a dimension. So maybe
yeah.
it's
In
that
fact,
reason.
yeah, in fact, the communists have, after few years, they have been very carefully and in a very shrewd manner, they have been able to manipulate this mandate from the heaven thing, which was there in the earlier centuries. They said that I have got a mandate from the heaven to rule over your people. So the Confucian values of
Yes.
hierarchy, and so in Beijing, just near the Tiananmen Square, you have the Forbidden Palace. So forbidden means, palace means it is forbidden for the masses to be part of the political, discourses and decision making. So all those, so Taoism, for example, the yin and the yang, and which is, the best way is always the middle way. The Buddhist influence, the golden middle path. So all these things basically have been pretty influential. But having said that, after the way in which economic modernization has advanced, religion slowly but surely is making its way back in the Chinese society, because people are facing a certain kind of enemy today, anomie, to use Durkheim's term, whereby they need to take a certain kind of psychological refuge in something, and religion is one of those things, where people are trying to take some succor from.
Hmm. No, absolutely right. Also, very paradoxical, no, that India has been is was the birthplace of Buddhism, and Sri Lanka, China, Japan, to where it managed to spread, is the one actually trying to figure out in its public discourse, or in its societal this thing, following the middle path in many ways. But thank you for such an interesting conversation, Venkat. And one last question, and we'll end with that. And this is from my young intern, Joshi Yogesh Kumar. You made a mention somewhere in your while in your conversation, and he wants to know: can we consider that on making academic studies in the mother tongue would have a role in China's technical scientific escalation? So what he's saying is basically, does language have a role to play in any way in the technical and the scientific evolution that has taken place in China?
It's a
So,
very
what is the
wonderful
contribution of
question.
language?
It's a very wonderful question, and let me tell you, this is the second time I am being asked this question, and I am yet to have, in this kind of a session. The same question was asked to me in my earlier session, which I had with someone else, and I really find this answer to this question very perplexing, simply because English has become just like our mother tongue to us. So we are not able to fathom, a world where you don't have English language, and still can you make progress? But if you look at, if you make a careful and in-depth, analysis of the whole thing, I think we Indians have overdone this English business. If you look at, you can think of East Asia as a region which is basically having pictographic language, and perhaps it enables them to think better. The right side and the left side, and all those things which makes your brain more active, and that is why, whatever you can say, the linguistics part of it. But if you look at the rest of the world, I mean, there are very few regions in the world who are dependent completely on English language for their success. If you look at France, if you look at Spain, if you look at Germany, even today they swear by their own mother tongues, and they have not been withheld, as far as their progress is concerned. They are absolutely advanced societies. So therefore, and what makes it strange in our country is, instead of rediscovering the beauty of our own languages, the overall ecosystem is such. So, for example, if you take the Andhra Pradesh government, recently Jagan Mohan Reddy has taken a decision that all the government schools need to use English as a medium of language and need to do away with Telugu. Now, some people have taken great pride in saying that, wow, it's a level, it is a level playing field and all that. Yeah, that is how the larger ecosystem is. But if you go deeper, do you think this is the right decision? Do you think this is a beginning of a more larger cultural disconnect with our own roots? So this is how I look at things. So I think it is we need to deeply think about this and need to revisit this whole question of language for sure.
No, but increasingly, Venkat, it is happening. The other kind of thing which you mentioned, that all states are now understanding the importance of language. So while you continue to have the traditional school which continue to teach in the local language of the state, that may be, because India is very, very diverse and it has a lot of linguistic inclusivity in that sense. So while that is happening, private schools have introduced a foreign language. Of course, English is the basic language of teaching, but states are increasingly moving towards setting up modern English language, English medium schools in the public sector, which is in the Sarkari system, and it's also happening in Rajasthan, interestingly. We have about 70 plus schools in the first phase, which have already come up with smart classrooms negotiated by technology. We are also living in an age where the Alexas and Siris are actually answering, helping children do their homework. So I don't know how we are going to negotiate with languages where the robots and the artificial intelligence and algorithms will solve a lot of our problems in times to come. But with those words, thank you very, very much. We come to the end of our session today. We are extremely grateful to you, Venkat, for giving us such a wonderful and insightful understanding of what China is from a whole 360-degree perspective. Of course, we've not touched much on the military aspect of it, but that is, I think, something which is very, very which people understand. But the meat lies today in this world is how you negotiate economically using technology with the world in which you are situated. Of course, none of us can choose our neighbors, so we have to learn to negotiate and live with them. But thanks once again. That was very, very interesting. And Venkat, may I request you to allow us to have a biblio for those of you who would want to read more books on this aspect of China. Then Venkat has very nicely consented to curate a very, very academic list of books for any of you who might be interested. So if you are interested, please DM me your request and I'll be happy to obtain a list from Venkat and pass it on to you, because the idea of this forum is to keep engagement, to read more, to understand more, to have conversations like these with experts. So Venkat, thank you once again so much for being with us here today and giving us so much of your valuable time and expertise. We deeply and truly appreciate your being here today with us. Thank you so very much.
Thanks a lot, Mugda. Thank you, audience, and thanks for being with me and giving me an opportunity to speak about something which I'm deeply passionate about. So I'm extremely thankful to the IAS Literary Society in Rajasthan and Mugda for inviting me for this interaction. I look forward to interact with you again, possible in the near future. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks once again. And I would now request my team to kindly put up the creative invite for the next session. And may I request the audiences that this year we are very happily doing our sessions in hybrid mode, because we want to bring you more and more experts. We are also happy to tell you that we have struck a lot of partnerships with the publishing houses. So you will be having many more authors come to Jaipur as part of the IS Literary Association. And on the 10th of March, may I kindly invite you for a very, very nice discussion on migration in the world, driven by the crises that has happened. A very wonderful book has been written called The Mediterranean Sea on the Syrian Refugee Crisis. It's in the crisis, in the environmental crisis, in the crisis that emerges from political instability in Africa and in the Middle East and elsewhere, which compels people to move from their homelands and to negotiate very, very difficult paths, as we have seen in the boat ride that was happening in the Mediterranean. And this is the book, and this is the author, Louis Philippe D'Alembert. He's a French author, can speak very well, fluently in English, and he will be in conversation with us on home and the world, what migration, identity, and exile mean to us in literature. And this is by invitation, so I'm inviting all of you. And this is happening in the physical space as part of the Bonjour India Festival. So may I request you to attend this session. Do attend this session on the 10th of March 2022. It's a Thursday at 5 p.m. in the book club at Jawahar Kala Kendra, Jaipur. And this is in partnership with the French Embassy in India, the French Institute, Alliance Française, Jawahar Kala Kendra, of course, and the Prabha Ketan Foundation. And this is happening on the sidelines of the JLF, which is taking place. And we will be bringing you many foreign authors this year because we've tied up with lot of institutions. So we are very, very happy to have you attend this session with us. Kindly RSVP here or on my mobile numbers or emails if you are interested in attending the session. Of course, I'll also send you a personal invite. So with those words, once again, allow me to close the session for today. With a lot of gratitude, thank you very much to everyone. जोशी योगेश जी, आपसे मेरा रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप ये सेशन को बंद कर दें ऑडियंस के लिए, बिकॉज एक थोड़ा सा हमें जो है वो दूरदर्शन इस